Okay. All right. Welcome to our Talking Teen Services session today. My name is Kate Bruner, and I am the Youth and Family Services Consultant at the Colorado State Library, and my pronouns are she, her. So a little bit about Talking Teen Services. This is a webinar series that we developed at the State Library in Colorado, and we discuss topics relevant to library professionals working with adolescents in their communities. This series and all of the Colorado State Library's youth services offerings are created by the librarians who are part of the Youth and Family Services team at the Colorado State Library. And our staff positions and operating expenses are paid for with grant funding from the Federal Institute for Museum and Library Services. And that's what allows us to offer those at no cost to y'all. So at the end of our session, we are going to ask you if you would please fill out a survey for this event. And we take that feedback very seriously. So we will be dropping a link in the chat later in order to give you access to that survey. And if you would take some time to fill that out, we would love that. So I think we're all set and ready to go. So I'm going to turn things over to our amazing presenters today from Arapahoe Libraries, and they are going to take it from there.
Okay, I am going to get things started for us. Just make sure everyone can see my screen being shared. My video has disappeared, so that's fun, but that's okay. Actually, I'm going to redo my screen share. Anyway, okay. So we are going to get started today. So you're at Understanding Teens. This is the second part of our three-part series. We're excited to be with you today. We will jump in with introductions of ourselves first. So I'm going to let Anush go first today.
Hi, my name is Anush. Pronouns are she, her, and I am a teen services librarian at the Arapahoe Libraries. I have been working in public libraries since 2008, and I worked with youth and teens.
I'm taking my cue to go next since my photo is now in the middle. My name is Erica. My pronouns are also she, her. I have been with Arapahoe Libraries as a teen librarian for almost 4 years. And before that, I worked in both public libraries, school libraries, academic libraries, and I have a background in education as well.
And I am Catherine. My pronouns are also she, her. And I am the supervisor of teen services for Arapahoe Libraries. I've been with the library system for about almost 15 years. And for 12 of those years before I became a supervisor, I was one of the teen services librarians. So excited to be with you today. One of my favorite things is getting to do training with staff who are maybe a little bit less confident working with teens. And getting to do some of that mentoring. So this, like I said, is part 2 of what we teach as a full 2-hour class with staff at our library system. So you get to enjoy it in smaller bite-sized chunks today. I managed to find my video, so that's going to be way less disorienting to me than talking to a blank screen. Anyway, so just a reminder, if you would like, you're welcome to introduce yourself in chat. We would love to know where we are, where everyone's coming from, what your role is in the library, whether you work with teens directly or it's just something that you do as sometimes as part of your role. So we'll start with our invitation to you. This is similar to last time. So if you were with us last time, we're going to just reiterate this each time. Today, we invite you to stay curious about the content and the content that we're sharing and the contributions of your colleagues. Approach those things with curiosity. When you're skeptical, maybe pause to ask yourself, tell me more, share perspectives. Without direct comparison. We acknowledge that there is a ton of expertise in this room. I really appreciate it. I went back actually and read all of the chat from last time because I learned so much, and so I appreciate your comments. Also be open, so let the content in. let the perspectives of colleagues in. We're going to be talking a lot about biases today, which are things that feel very personal and sometimes hit a little hard if we recognize perhaps that we had some sort of bias that we weren't aware of. So just kind of be open to exploring those things, examining things. If your personal truth is challenged, try not to shy away from that, but examine it. And just remember that there's not really a right or wrong, something to notice. And then considering intent and impact, we want to acknowledge that our intent does not always equal the impact on you. So just sort of making space for that, and acknowledging, again, like we did last time, that a lot of the issues affecting teens today have been politicized. And so some of this content may feel like it is leaning one way or the other, or political, but that's not necessarily our intent. It's just the nature of the issues facing the lives of teens today. So, and again, our little disclaimer that each of the topics that we're covering today, as we get into discussion about different types of biases, are entire fields of study on their own. And so our goal is to relate them to the lives of teens and how they show up in our library spaces, and not to fully examine each type of bias. We will have, or there is on the Talking Teen Services website for these sessions, a handout with all of the links and other things that we are talking about today. So if you have something that you want to explore further, we would encourage you to go and check out that handout. We have been kind of updating it each time, because we were just mentioning to Kate that we just constantly keep finding resources that we want to share with other people that we find really good. So even if you downloaded it last time, we encourage you to go check it out again, and probably once more before the last session, because it will have changed. I added something yesterday to it, so it will be new yet again when we teach our third session of this. So we are going to jump into a little icebreaker.
Right. So, oof, I love the expression on that cat's face to start this off, because it feels like side-eye, right? So for our icebreaker today, because we are talking about biases and stereotypes, we would love for you to share in chat, or if you're less comfortable sharing in chat, just reflect on what is something that triggers immediate judgment for you. And then how does that change when you're working with children, teens, adults? I will share mine because it is both a funny story and yeah, it's funny, and it's also something that really made me think. So back in April, Catherine and I went through a really wonderful training opportunity that's offered by an organization called Flourish Lab here in Colorado. And when we started this activity thinking about our biases, we were asked to write down like all the biases we could think of, right? Whether that's something that we're seeing or something we hear, any of those things. And so I wrote down quite a few that had to do with things that I heard. And then I was trying really hard to be as honest with myself as I could be. I try very hard to not be a judgmental person. And I was trying very hard to take a hard look at myself and what are things that trigger for me. And I realized that one of my triggers that is fairly immediate are mullets, the hairstyle. And in my defense, I have that bias for a few reasons. Some personal experiences. Very recently, like in the last couple of years, a student comes into a book talk outreach visit. He's got a mullet. I'm like, ooh, I see you. You're going to cause me trouble. And he absolutely did. Like, he poured some spoiled chocolate milk on the kid in front of him. But also, I do realize that that is something that I see, and immediately my back goes up, and I am expecting that kind of behavior, which isn't fair, right? That doesn't mean that my bias isn't valid and isn't something that maybe comes from my experience and my lens, but it's not necessarily fair. And in thinking about how does that change, when I see a mullet on like a little kid, I'm okay with it. It's the teens and adults that it's a real, oh, okay. And that in that session, sharing that, it turned out that one of the other participants, who was quite possibly the nicest woman I've ever met in my life, piped up in a very soft voice, I had a mullet when I was younger, and I was absolutely seen in that moment. And it was a real learning moment for me. So there's been quite a bit of growth since then. I can happily share that met a kid with a mullet the other day, and instead of my back going up, I chuckled to myself and thought, I'm not going to do that. So I share that story because it's a good example of some growth for me that was very recent. And so it's a constant process, recognizing our biases, recognizing what we're going into a situation with. It's a constant process, right? And we're constantly learning and realizing different kinds of triggers that we might have. I can see a whole lot being shared in the chat. Scooters and skateboards in tow. I can definitely see that. Yes. I love these, the trash on the tables or the floor. Absolutely. Like these are valid things, right? And they're also things that are important for us to be aware of as we're going into working with our teens and our tweens and adults and children as well.
Okay, so in any interpersonal interaction, it can be important to consider what lenses we are viewing others with and what lenses they may be viewing us with. So, with that in mind, we'd like to start off by talking a bit about stereotypes and biases as they pertain to working with youth. So, a stereotype is an overgeneralization formed about an entire group of people based on shared characteristics or experiences, so like a preconceived notion. A bias is an opinion formed about someone or something based on one's own perception of that person or thing, so a tendency or preference towards a particular perspective. And explicit bias refers to bias or prejudice someone is aware they have, uh, while an implicit bias refers to attitudes or beliefs people might be unaware they hold. So, with Erica's example, the mullets, she might be aware or she is aware that she might have that bias, but there might be some biases we have that we are not aware of. And implicit biases often reflect systemic issues. Okay, so let's think about some of the common biases or stereotypes about library staff and about teens. So if you would like to share that in the chat.
I'm nodding
Yeah, the
because I'm
reading all
seeing
day.
you read all day. Yeah.
We definitely read all
Yes.
day.
Oh yeah.
Don't you?
All the time. Yes. And the only time we look up from our book is to shush the patrons coming in.
All librarians are old women. Yes. Yeah. Librarians are sticklers for being quiet. I am actually quite a loud person, and I don't always realize how much my voice is carrying. And I have multiple occasions where I've been the one shushed in a meeting room within a teen program and not the teens. So yes, that's definitely a thing. Yeah, these are great. Thank you. Keep them coming. We are going to jump into some of the biases in particular. We're going to look at a few, as Anush mentioned, more implicit systemic biases as they affect teens. and how they show up in our library spaces. So these are, again, we'll just reiterate that invitation to kind of reflect and examine whether or not this is something that has shown up for you. Maybe it's showing up and we don't always realize it as we're going through some of these things. We're going to only touch on what I would consider a handful of potentially many, many more. But these are some that in conversations that we've had with youth that they are particularly aware of sometimes, and then things that we see show up in the interactions that we have with other adults and library staff in particular. So we'll start with ageism bias. So this graphic is from a study that was done at Washington University called Kids These Days, Why Youth-Directed Ageism is an Issue for Everyone. And so I think ageism is something that is familiar to most adults, but most often when we talk about ageism, and most research on ageism actually focuses on ageism directed at older people. So it is a prejudice or discrimination on the grounds of a person's age. But there's a growing body of research focusing on ageism directed at young people, which is sometimes called youngism, and which I find to be a funny name for it, but it fits, it works. Youngism, interestingly, and different from ageism directed at adults, is mainly a cohort bias rather than a life stage bias, which basically means that people are lumped into kind of their generational groups. So if you think about Gen Z, Gen Alpha, millennials even, I think many people don't realize I'm considered an elder millennial. And so they don't really realize how old we are now, actually, and we are not the young people that they're talking about. That's becoming more apparent. But youngism, as I said, is that cohort bias, and it assigns unfavorable stereotypes due to their generational differences to older adults. And this research study actually found everything from those unfavorable stereotypes, that they are coddled, disrespectful, radically progressive, and inexperienced. There was a kind of a think piece done by a Harvard University professor called Age Discrimination and the Personhood of Children and Youth. And he talks about the fact that age is actually a poor proxy for experience. A 16 or 17-year-old may have more relevant lived experience with respect to particular social issues than a 25 or 40-year-old. And to put it in very real terms for us, if we think about children today, they are the only ones who have, the only people alive who know what it is like to go to school during a global pandemic. And so that lived experience gives them this wealth of experience and insights that could help inform adults about how to evaluate education policy options based on that. So just something to keep in mind. Just because you're young doesn't mean that you don't have experience to contribute, and incorporating their valuable experience is especially important for us as library staff as we think about designing services and space for them. The idea of incorporating youth voice, listening to the things that they need, and not just immediately discounting suggestions that they might have because we think they are too young or don't know what they're talking about or any number of other things.
Okay, the adultification bias. Actually, before we hop in there, I have a really quick story about ageism. My husband and my son, who just turned 18 in August, a year ago, my husband literally said to my son, "You'll understand when you're older." And I had just taught this training and got to turn to him and say, "Hold on, let me give you a list of things that he's wise about." And it became this really, really beneficial conversation for my son. It ended up giving him some confidence. And I've since seen that happen when I acknowledge with other teens that I work with, you have experiences that I could never understand. So kind of acknowledging stuff like that is a great way to kind of build some good rapport and relationships with them. That's been on my mind for since we did the last webinar. So thanks for allowing me to digress for a second. So adultification bias is another bias that's really important for us to be aware of. This is a form of racial prejudice where children of minoritized groups, especially Black children, are treated as being more mature or are seen as being older than they actually are. And so what happens then is that behaviors, actions, interchanges they would be seen as normal if you were thinking this is a teen that I'm looking at. But because people are thinking this is an adult, it becomes a point of friction or a point of contention. So we use this image because this is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who is an excellent example of this. He is 15 in these pictures. And he has talked about when he was a teenager, looking like, I think it was a used car salesman. And that greatly impacts how others around saw him and expected him to behave. This leads to more opportunities or consequences in terms of discipline because the assumption is that behaviors are being seen as malicious rather than a point of their developmental growth. So when we're thinking about in the library, being aware of how are we responding to a situation? How are we responding to some of the exchanges or some of the behaviors that we're seeing? There are studies that have shown that Black boys as young as 10 are often viewed as older and less innocent by law enforcement and teachers and educators. And if that's the case, then it's very likely happening in our library as well. So one of the things that we like to practice, and one of the things we like to suggest, is that instead of assuming how old someone is, I have also very recent experiences with being very, very wrong about how old I thought a teen was that I was interacting with. Ask them what grade they're in. If you know the schools in the area, you can ask what school do they go to, but asking what grade one of them is in, it gives you a better idea of how old they actually are. And it gives you an opportunity again to kind of build some of that rapport, but it gives you a second to kind of pause also and reflect on some of the behaviors that you might be seeing and whether they are developmentally appropriate.
Okay, so let's talk about racial and cultural bias. So this might be something that we've had more conversation about, hopefully had more conversations about, but we wanted to focus on perceived racism, which is the subjective interpretation by the affected individual of treatment based on one's racial background. So even if the explicit intention is not there, the person who is perceiving the racism will be affected. And perceived racism can have negative psychological outcomes and other negative health outcomes. So implicit racism can be directly related to how staff and libraries interact with teens, and can lead to instances of perceived racism bias. So in libraries, the way it can be seen is that implicit racial bias can guide staff decisions about when to call the police. And this is especially an issue with vaguely worded codes of conduct that leave a lot to subjective interpretation of staff enforcing the rules. So things like disruptive behavior and horseplay and making too much noise. Those are they're subjective. And there is a good example. There was a study, and this is in a school setting, but it really applies to a lot of other settings. And the study found that students of color were more likely to receive office referrals and other disciplinary measures for subjective infractions like disruptive behavior or disrespect or excessive noise, and that is something that we see in library codes of conduct a lot. So in contrast, the white students received office referrals for specific things like smoking or vandalism. And in school, students of color, both boys and girls, are suspended at 3 times the rate of white students. And these disparities begin in preschool, regardless of the race of the teacher. Um, and, that might also be present in libraries as well. So, research has also shown that Black and white students, when they're rated on their classroom behavior, Black students are rated as poor classroom citizens than their white peers. Um, so this is really something to think about when we're talking about racial and cultural bias and implicit bias, and how some of those things might be present even if it's something that we are not aware of.
So when talking about ableism, one of the resources that we link to in that handout that Catherine mentioned at the beginning is a blog for the Center for Disability Rights that has this, I find, really great definition of ableism. And that blogger said that ableism is a set of beliefs or practices that devalue and discriminate against people with physical, intellectual, or psychiatric disabilities, and often rests on the assumption that disabled people need to be fixed in one form or the other. And so this definition really just kind of, for me, hits the nail on the head, right? This bias, or whether implicit or explicit, this belief that somehow disabled people are less capable than someone who would describe themselves as able-bodied. And that's something that I also think goes along with ageism in a way, because there's often this misunderstanding or belief that young people are less likely to be disabled than older people, which isn't the case in any way, shape, or form. And so when we are working with teens and young people, being aware of this bias and how this bias can sometimes show up is really important. So some ways that the bias can show up: you determining what assistance is needed without consulting the disabled person. This is disrespectful in many ways, right? You deciding what's best for someone else, or believing that all disabilities are visible, or telling someone you don't look disabled, or, to go along with age, you look too young to be disabled. Avoiding a disabled person because you're not sure how to interact, even not being able to say the word disabled and using euphemisms, because the implication there is that being disabled or disabled is bad somehow. And that's not a message that we want to send to anyone, let alone the youth that we're working with. So if we're looking at this chart, this comes from the National Center for Education Statistics, that breaks down what disabilities were on record for students in K through 12 nationwide. In Colorado, specifically, in the 2023-2024 school year, the Colorado Department of Education reported that over 108,000 students between ages 5 through 21 were disabled. That's a pretty impactful number. And it's important to keep in mind that those are just the disabilities that they were aware of or that were reported. And so when we're thinking about library services, there are a few things to keep in mind and a few practical things to keep in mind. One, some behaviors or actions may be misinterpreted. Sometimes it's not that a teen is attempting to act out or misbehave or anything like that. It might just be an expression of their experience. Also, making sure that we have adaptive tech and resources is hugely important, and making sure that we're letting teens know that they are available, not forcing them on them, but making sure that we are advertising them equally to adult patrons as well as young patrons, not making that assumption that young patrons might not need them. It's always okay to ask, how can I help? Right? That's fine. But wait to be told how to help. Again, don't make that determination about this is what assistance is needed and I'm going to give this to you. Don't question or comment when someone says they need an assistive tech or some kind of support. One of the things that I hear a lot in schools when we go visit schools, if they have their students sit on the floor, is when the students stand up, oh, my back or oh, my knees, an adult saying, you're too young to be having knee problems or back problems. Don't make those assumptions. We don't know what's going on. And that can be really impactful in a really negative way. That stuff sticks with you. Another important thing, and you kind of mentioned this previously as well, this is another point to consider your patron codes of conduct. Who are they written for and who do they privilege? Because more often than not, they are not made for neurodiverse and disabled people. And that is absolutely something that can be edited and adapted.
I will also just say, if you are someone who has influence over like your building design or any sort of plans like that, thinking about some of those universal design principles, but also just that ability to advocate for people with disabilities to not be an afterthought or push back. An example that I have, there's a school that we go to, I was just there last Friday, which made me think of this. It's an older school, but they've set it up on a kind of a odd setup, and the library itself is in the middle of a landing that is only accessible by stairs in the most immediately accessible part of it. And then you have to walk down a very long corridor to get to the ramp that would allow you to go to the library at this school if you couldn't use or access the stairs. And so thinking about that, thinking about how quickly sometimes kids need to get from one place to another in between classes, made me kind of pause and like ponder whether or not this was truly accessible to the kids who couldn't access it via the stairs, which are right at the front of the school. You can get to them very quickly versus going basically to the back of the school to get to the ramp that would allow them to be there. And how often is that the case? So they're kind of things are stuck in as an afterthought or not made as readily accessible. Because if you have mobility issues and you're not in a wheelchair even, and you couldn't navigate the stairs, that being asked to walk to the back of the school to then go up a ramp also makes that really inaccessible to someone. So sometimes things to think about, ways to advocate for more just universal accessibility for anyone, because I don't have severe mobility issues, and sometimes my knees are hurting and it's hard to go up and down stairs. And so having a ramp would be a great thing. And so again, that's that universal design principle, just kind of thinking about what would make it a better experience for everyone who needs to access a space, not just disabled people. But you know, they also shouldn't be an afterthought in the considerations that we're making. So what are the effects of all of these biases? We're going to talk a little bit about code switching, masking, and microaggressions, some of these big kind of consequences we don't always think about, but definitely exist in almost everyone to an extent, actually. So some definitions of a few terms. Code switching is actually a term that was coined in the linguistics field and originally meant switching between different languages. However, it has been adopted and today more universally applies most in racial and ethnic contexts, and means switching how you present yourself and communicate in different social contexts. Similarly, masking refers to the behavior or coping mechanism individuals may employ to hide or conceal their true thoughts, feelings, or difficulties related to their mental health. It often involves presenting oneself in a way that conforms to societal expectations or norms, even if it contradicts who or your what you're actually truly experiencing internally. And sometimes what comes out of some of these things, but also exists on its own, is the concept of microaggressions, which is is kind of defined and was a term coined by Chester Pierce in the 1970s, who was a Black Harvard University professor, as an unintended insult. But again, and it was specifically at that time addressing like insults and indignities directed at the Black community, and it has been adopted more broadly. With microaggressions, and really with all of these things, I think it's important for us to be particularly aware of them, and how they're showing up. So for microaggressions, some teens will call you on it, and I think it is something that is a more common conversation that I see happening these days. But they might be less likely to call you out on it because we are in positions of power as adults. Even when we don't feel powerful, we are in a position of power. And so they may be less likely to call us on that. Thinking about code switching and masking, somewhat problematically, I think, some experts suggest that both code switching and masking might be necessary for social integration and academic and professional success. However, what I think is important to consider is that many times both of these things are done in order to maximize the comfort of others or to receive baseline fair treatment. And so, as you can imagine, constantly having to hide certain facets of our personality can have negative mental health effects and can affect us or teens' feelings of not fitting in or not belonging. I will kind of qualify that to say that, as I mentioned, I think to an extent, everyone does it a little bit because there are parts of ourselves also, like I recognize there are parts of myself that I choose not to bring into public spaces, that I'm choosing not to share with other people, which can be a form of masking. And that is the choice of the individual, if they want to do that. But knowing that when we are requiring some of those masking behaviors for someone to be successful in our spaces, that really is a form of bias and discrimination that is something I think we need to pause and examine. So thinking about how that relates to library services and making teens welcome in our library, again, thinking about how our patron codes of conduct are worded, our spaces are set up, and our services are structured. Just sort of examining whether they are created in such a way that will require certain groups to hide parts of their identities to make others comfortable or have success in the space. And I think one of the things, and we were talking about this a little bit with some of the teams that we work with really closely. We have interns and volunteers who work with us on a much more regular basis than just some of our teens who come into the library day to day. And what we start to see for some of those teens is that when they have to engage in code switching or masking, sometimes how this shows up too becomes this negative self-talk for them. And it's this idea of, they recognize that they have failed to mask some behavior that they know is unacceptable to like the adults around them. We saw this in particular with a couple of our interns in the last year or two, and they would constantly apologize or talk down about themselves or and so that is something to keep in mind as well. And we really try to kind of disrupt that cycle, that negative self-talk, and work with the kids. That's not going to be something that's realistic to do in every situation, but I think when the opportunity arises to be able to have some of those conversations with kids about like, where's this coming from? Or, like you don't have to apologize for existing, I think is something that we said to one of our interns multiple times every shift that they worked with us. So just things to keep in mind as we're thinking about some of the spaces that we're designing, the environments that we're trying to create for teens. Are we creating an environment where a kid could successfully unmask after school? Or thinking back to our last webinar where we were talking about some of the kids who have been masking all day at school and they get to us at the library and they actually are just exhausted and can't mask anymore. Are we setting up a space where they can be unmasked successfully in our spaces and feel welcome and not shamed for that? So something to keep in mind. So we've talked about quite a few different biases. Again, this was not a comprehensive list. There are infinite more, I'm sure, that we could talk about, but these are ones that we see coming up in conversations that we have, that we see coming up in ourselves sometimes as well. And so an invitation to reflect. This is not something I would like anyone to put in chat, just something to think about. If there's an interaction that you've had with a teen at the library where bias may have affected your reactions, and what would you do differently now? And I've seen a lot of those questions about like, how do you tell how old they are, those sorts of things. And we've definitely had some of those things happen with us where we made an assumption about age. We let a very small child into a teen program because we just assumed that, yeah, oh, I mean, you have to be at least 13 or 14. And it turns out they were in like 5th grade. So anything from that to other interactions that we might have had. So just something to reflect on as we continue a couple of other points of discussion.
Yeah, so whenever we hear teens like kind of talk down about themselves, I always wonder like how many times have they heard other adults like say those things to them, like you talk too much, or you know, you're too loud, or why can't you concentrate? You know, a lot of those things I always wonder, and then I feel really bad because like those kids are hearing those things like all the time, and they just internalize so many of those. So I wanted to talk about when we ask the teens to leave for the day, how does our next interview with them go? And it is definitely something that can cause preconceptions. So if we ask a teen to leave and maybe the next day they come back with this preconceived notion that we hate when they have fun and we just really do not like them. And maybe when they come back, library staff were thinking, oh, they're going to be here, they're going to be causing trouble. And sometimes when we just kind of have logs of that behavior, when we just keep track of every single thing they've done and others are reading about it, it is giving us the idea that they're going to be asked to leave for another reason or for the same reason. And you know, in our library, when someone is asked to leave for the day, when they come back the next day, it is supposed to be a fresh interaction. And I wonder if that truly happens because they are kind of already thinking that we might ask them to leave. And we are thinking that they got asked to leave so many times already, and I bet they're going to be asked to leave again. So, you know, in some of our libraries, when teens have been asked to leave so many times, it almost becomes a competition for them. We have noticed that some teens are kind of thinking of better ways to get asked to leave. So they're thinking, well, you know, if I did this one small thing and already they don't like me, they're going to ask me to leave. Why don't I impress my friends? What, you know, when I'm at it so that they can ask me to leave and then I'll have something to brag about of what I did in the library. So I think it's important to really just think about those biases and to uh, think about whether we are going to be, if we have asked someone to leave the day before, if we are going to be really more aware of and keeping track of every activity and uh, start like noticing every little thing they do versus like someone who's always quiet and who's always been very polite and nice, and then they do something and you're like, well, no, they would have never done that. You know, they're such a good kid. I'm just gonna, or you know, if they do something, you just kind of let it go because you are expecting them to behave well in the library. So it's something that, I always keep in mind when I'm enforcing the rules is, am I really being picking and choosing what I enforce based on how I perceive a kid?
So one of the practical strategies that we actually learned from that training that I mentioned earlier, that has been really impactful for me to think about, is the purposeful pause. And this is when you intentionally take a second to pause before you respond, or before you engage. And it's basically 6 seconds, because as the person who was leading the workshop said, everyone has 6 seconds. And it's kind of incredible how 6 seconds feels like both a very small amount of time and also a very large amount of time. There's actually science behind that, like scientific studies have shown you have 6 seconds when you're having an emotional reaction before it goes, and you just kind of take off after that. And so what we wanted to demonstrate, right? We have the animation on the slide, right? I'm remembering correctly. Excellent, wonderful. We wanted to kind of demonstrate how long 6 seconds is. So we're going to go ahead and to do that now with our animation. 6 seconds. Like, I don't know about all of you, but I got several breaths in there. But it gives you that moment to stop and examine yourself and how you're about to respond, right? Am I about to speak to this teen differently because he's got a mullet and I just know that he's about to pour some rancid chocolate milk on me? Or, okay, hold on, I need to hold that in check. And what's the best way to kind of move forward? And I've been seeing in the chat a lot of questions have come up about like responding and things like that. This is a great first step to that. It gives you a second to think. You can also fully acknowledge that that's what you're doing, right? If you are in the middle of having a conversation with a teen and you need that 6 seconds, saying, give me just 1 second. I'm just going to take 6 seconds so that I can process, and then I want to continue the conversation. A lot of times they respond with some real respect there, right? Because you are speaking to them with respect, which is also very, very important. So wanted to share that strategy.
And so we'll wrap up before we get to questions, just with some challenges to everyone to challenge your bias. So an invitation to get curious about yourself, about the young people in your library, challenge ourselves to give up our bias, to seek learning if we recognize that maybe we do have a bias that we need to unlearn. Really seek out, there are tons of great resources out there for overcoming some of these biases, or at least being aware of them and trying to fight against them. And then seeking opportunities to intentionally connect where you usually don't. Like, I'll challenge Erica to connect with a kid with a mullet. That's just a joke. Anyway, but try to find opportunities to intentionally connect, and to disrupt some of those biases and stereotypes that exist. So I know that I saw lots of questions coming through, so I'm going to jump to our question slide. This is our side-eye pug today.
There's little better than side-eyeing animals. They're just wonderful.
I have a pug chihuahua mix, so I know that expression well. That pug side eye. So yeah, we had a bunch of really great questions that I want us to be able to dive into. I do also want to mention, we're going to try to get to all of these questions. So we may end up going a little bit past noon in order to get to them. We will continue the recording until we've moved through all of those questions. So if you need to go right at noon, just know you'll get a copy of the recording, and you can always watch that last few minutes if you want to hear their answers to other questions. And then the other thing I'm just going to go ahead and do in case you need to leave at noon is drop the survey link into the chat. And so we use these feedback surveys in two ways. One is that we provide data to our funder, because that is something we need to do. But two is that we read every last one of them. And so that way we can take in feedback or ideas or learn different things maybe we could do in the future about how we could improve these particular series of Talking Teen Services or what additional training we might be able to provide. So just know we read every single one. So if you are interested in sharing with us, we would really love to hear from you. So that's the link, and you can put my name as the presenter and then just put in Understanding Teens. Actually, that should be Understanding Teens 2 is what you can put into that survey. So, okay, we ready for questions?
Yeah, I'm just going to put up our contact information for a moment. If you would like to reach out to us, please do. And then I'll stop sharing so that we can just chat about the question.
Perfect.
Okay. All right.
All right. So our first question actually goes back to the ageism topic, and someone was curious about whether or not you might have any advice for staff who are part of Gen Z and also work with teens. So the person who asked the question said they seem to struggle with being taken seriously both by teens and by adults, not so much in the library system itself, but by adult patrons.
I am not
Oh.
Gen Z, and I struggle with being taken seriously by adult patrons also sometimes. Saying that to say that I empathize, I'm a very short person, and so that impacts that sometimes. So I absolutely empathize. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes what that comes down to is standing your ground, even when you have to do it over and over again. And one of the tactics that I've been empowered to employ in some spaces that I've worked in is the ability to take a pause in a patron interaction, and kind of call it out and say, if you wouldn't mind giving me just a minute, I need to just step back and kind of think about how we're going to move forward. And I will be right back with you. Or sometimes if you can rely on another staff member to step in, if it's one of those exchanges that is becoming like high tension. But for me, saying that kind of established almost a boundary, that was like, hey, that almost drew attention to something about this interaction isn't going well. And that doesn't always work. Unfortunately, there is nothing that always works, but for me, that was something that did actually work a few times, and kind of painted me in a light of, I am able to set this boundary, and now you see that I have this boundary, if that makes sense. And with teens, honestly, I just kind of call it out, and I'm like, hey, let's talk with each other human to human. But I think, much like a lot of people who work with youth, I actually feel more comfortable talking with teens and youth than I do with adults sometimes. So that might be why I feel more comfortable saying things like, hey, hang on. I really want to be friends, but I also really need you to listen to me right now. Although I'm usually saying it up because, again, really short.
I think that it's not really, I don't think it's really important to be taken seriously and being seen as the person in power, especially when they're interacting with youth and teens. They see that a lot at school. I know it's like something that a lot of teachers are told that they need to be always in control, and I don't think that really is necessary. And I think that if the teens can relate to you, I think they're more likely to want to do what you say. And I noticed that sometimes when I tell the teens, like, I really do not want someone else to ask you to leave the library, and I'm your friend here, and so they're not really listening to you because they think you have all this power. They're doing it because they want to, and they like you and respect you, which doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be the person in a suit that they're going to be afraid of. So they're listening to you for that reason.
I don't really have anything profound to add. That's different.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so the next question I saw come through was an ask about whether or not you all might have any suggestions about how to gently ask adults or young people if they are within an appropriate range for a teen space. And they give an example. For example, my space is hard restricted to 12 to 18, and I have to ask a lot of folks if they are within that range a lot. So just curious if you have any suggestions, like how would you phrase like checking in with people around age and the space that they're in.
I saw someone's comment that they use kind of a script with everyone, and I think that's great, just being kind of consistent with everyone. I have another coworker who one of her favorite things to say is like direct is kind. So being direct with someone and just kind of asking really directly, which you can do with that script of like, this space is we reserve it for 12 to 18-year-olds. If you're not a part of that age group, you're welcome to, like, our policy at our library is that if you're not a part of that age group, you're welcome to browse the collection, but you're not really welcome to settle in the space or allowed to settle in the space. And so just having that conversation, again, consistently with most people who come into the space, from that standpoint of welcoming and also letting people know the expectations up front, I think is an approach I would take.
When I would have those conversations, I did have a script also, and I would also often include in that, we like to check in with everyone who's in the space just to make sure that we're upholding our policies or our guidelines, just as a way to say, hey, I'm not just singling you out because you look really young or you look really old, which might be an example of my overthinking. Like they may not have been having that impact, but in my head, it was oh, let me tell you that I'm doing this to everybody kind of thing. And sometimes for me, that alleviated some of my own apprehension or my tension.
I will say we have to do this on the other end of the age spectrum just as often. We have a lot of 9, 10, 11-year-olds who really want to hang out in the teen space because it's like cool. It's also where our gaming systems are and things like that. And so they really want to be in that space. So we're having similar conversations with kiddos on the other end of that age range as well. So again, just consistent across the board. But yeah.
I don't have anything to add, so I can move to the next question.
Yeah, no worries. So actually the next question was whether or not there are good examples of library code of conduct policies that could be shared. And I think we have a couple that have been shared in other Talking Teen Services sessions that I've held on to. So I'm happy to attach those when I send out the recording as well, if people would like to take a look at those, because they've already been shared publicly, so I could share them again. Just collect those up. But I would also maybe ask you all if there are any examples you can think of around like positive phrasing or like elements to include in a library code of conduct for folks to consider to kind of address mitigating some of these biases that might crop up.
Great question. And I mean, I will freely admit, like we talk about this a lot. We are talking to ourselves in the same breath that we're speaking to everyone else. I don't think our library is necessarily quite there yet with having one of those really responsive patron codes of conduct. I am excited that we have a project next year where we will be working with a local organization to look at our patron code of conduct from kind of a restorative justice and trauma-informed perspective to see how we might rewrite it with youth in mind, but really for all ages. So that is something that's coming and work still to be done. But definitely, I think it's something that you're not alone if you feel like yours isn't there. It's a one of those, I think we're at the place of acknowledging that there's a problem and still working on trying to correct some of that. So I don't know that I have like really specific language. I anticipate that some of it will come, but I'll see if Erica or Anush have any brilliant insights. That was a lot of pressure.
Was literally just about to say, wow, that's a lot of pressure. I think the same thing. I think we've been having these conversations a lot about patron codes of conduct, and I'm also very excited for that project. I think it's going to be really fascinating to kind of think about some of those things. There have been some codes of conduct that I've seen that they de-emphasize noise and language, which I think is an important thing to do, particularly for youth and teens. I think actually there's another question that might have mentioned this, but I think one of the things that we hear most often is that teens can be loud, and they absolutely can be. But those codes of conduct that de-emphasize that as being a kind of actionable behavior, I think are really important. Because one of the things that we know from studying the developmental stages of the teen years is that they don't always know that. It's not intentional. And so to punish something that, or not just punish, but to have like drawn out consequences for something that's not intentional can be kind of harmful, and goes against creating that kind of welcoming space. So that's something that I would say if you have and I understand and absolutely respect space, right? Spaces are tough when you're in an open space and sound carries, like that is really hard. But that is, if there's a way to get around that, I think that can be really important. In an ideal world, we would just have fantastic, large teen spaces in every single library. But also in an ideal world, our libraries would be just huge and enormous and like castle buildings. I dream of turrets.
Right, and have everything we could possibly need in them. Right. Yeah, I've also seen like, if your code of conduct like at a policy level, it is very difficult to change, right? That I've also seen people co-create with teens, co-design with teens, kind of very specific like agreements for the teen spaces in particular. And I've heard that like for the people who've done that it's been very impactful because the teens are taking ownership over the space and over determining what they're going to do and not do in that, what they're going to agree to do and not do in that space. So I've seen that as like a proactive strategy sometimes that people use. They can't necessarily affect policy change at the code of conduct level, but can they work with teens within that framework to come to agreements together about what they're going to expect of themselves and each other in that space. So okay, our next question was related to masking. And then the question is, where is the line between asking teens to mask and causing harm in the process and having some rules so that everyone can use the space together? Again, specifically kind of around noise and behavior. Is like separate spaces always the answer, or might there be other strategies?
I I would try to accommodate the person or to accommodate others. So if, the whole area is already kind of higher noise level than if someone is trying to have a quiet space, I would try to find them a quiet space. Or if the whole library is very quiet at the time and someone is being, you know, louder than the overall noise, like a lot louder than the overall noise level, I would try to find an accommodation for them, or to try to ask, if there is anything that we can do or anything that they need from us. It's not always possible, but ideally, a lot of times it does actually resolve the situation.
Yeah, I think being creative, and we keep trying, and every scenario is a little bit different, right? Okay, our next question is, again, kind of related to the space thing. There's some common themes, right? We all have these sort of common challenges that we often deal with when we're working with teens. So this person said, I would love to be able to offer a space where teens can feel comfortable and relaxed, but sometimes that means they get a little bit louder. We do not have a closed teen space, and our teen space is right off the main floor where sound carries almost to a weird degree. So any recommendations for letting them do their thing, but still recognizing that volume needs to be watched? For example, normally I say, hey, I love that you guys are here hanging out, but the sound carries in here and we can hear you. Can you lower the volume a bit? Which works sometimes, but sometimes I am talking to the same kids over and over.
Had this experience a lot lately. We have a lot of open plan libraries, which have become the bane of my existence. Whoever decided a library should be one giant open room. And we have that exact issue, and it's like they built it to be an amphitheater that just bounces the noise just so. We have had a little bit of success, and again, this is probably a limitation that might be financial as well, but sometimes we've had a little bit of success with, if you can't build a wall, create a wall with creatively arrange your shelving for a little bit of sound buffer, or add, I've seen libraries use some of those big movable whiteboards as walls, things that could become sound buffers. We have also actually just used some of our like decor as also noise mitigation. So we have like things that hang from the ceiling that are actually made out of like cloth or felt that absorb some of the sound before it carries too far. Again, these might be design choices that are out of your control. But I mean, I think the other thing that personally I would like to see libraries work towards is sort of working with our patrons on a re-education that, since we are community spaces, that idea that we are going to be quiet sanctuaries, I would love to see that start to like leave the just society's idea of what a library is, because sometimes yes, there's this idea, if it's a very quiet library, that they're being too noisy, but actually they're just talking in a normal volume, and so I don't know that my answer is the love, but we do just keep having those conversations, and I've done it myself within the last week. I've talked to the same kids 30 times in a night, and it's just sort of reminding. And sometimes it gets to be when they like see me coming, they're like, "Oh yeah, we gotta be quiet. We're being loud again," and it's just that they've forgotten. And it's not that they're intentionally doing it, it's just that they've genuinely forgotten. And so I think just approaching it with patience and understanding that most likely they are not doing it intentionally or maliciously, that they're just excited they don't realize that they've gotten loud again. I can empathize with that. Like I said, sometimes I don't realize when I've gotten loud either, and I realize it later when it's too late.
Yeah, sometimes like some of the behaviors we talk about with teens, like adults, experience them too, either ourselves as adults or adults in the library as well. So, okay, we've got one more question today. And someone asked, if a teen is behaving poorly in a program and addressed by staff, is it appropriate to bring it up before the next program? And they gave an example, like saying, let's make sure today goes better than last week. And also maybe the reverse, if a teen behaves great after a pattern of behaving poorly, is it appropriate to bring it up at the next program? For example, thank you so much for engaging positively last week.
I personally would not bring up the past negative interaction because it's kind of setting that up that I am watching your behavior today to make sure you're not doing the same thing you were doing last time. And I feel like that is kind of showing that I already have a bias and that I'm going to be watching them. So I don't know, maybe others don't feel that way, but I feel like I would stay away from mentioning anything about the past bad interaction and just be positive and talk to them like they're just any patron. And I don't know about the bringing up if they did something good in the past. I maybe you would like say something in the present if they're doing something well, but I don't know. I don't know how others feel about that particular one.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of positive. I think I've read studies that talk about how like one negative comment or drawing attention to a negative experience can really cause some deep, like that sticks with you. Um, so I like Anush, I'm a big fan of the positive, and not necessarily calling back to a previous experience. I really like saying things like, hey, I'm so excited to see you today. I think we're going to have a really great time. Like, this is going to be like, I think we're going to have a great day. Because that feels to me like it's setting up for, hey, I'm expecting to have fun with you today. Not, I'm expecting you to completely screw up my afternoon. And so that's what I would often do, especially when I was working in that middle school library. There were a couple of students who, sometimes they were not having great days, and they would come in and there would be a lot of cleanup after they left. But then when they came in again, I would try really hard to be like really positive and excited and like, hey, what are we getting up to today? That kind of thing. I There are, of course, instances where something happens and you do need to have some kind of conversation. But those conversations are most impactful when time hasn't passed in between. If time has passed in between, then when you bring it up again, the implication is that you've been thinking about this and dwelling on it and you're now expecting it. And so it is, I'm seeing a lot of people say every day is a clean slate, which is really, really hard, right? Like one of the things that I've heard from people that I work with now and have worked with before is like, but when it becomes a pattern, it's a problem. Like, well, I mean, I don't know that it necessarily it's a problem. It's just another conversation. And that's really, really hard because sometimes you feel like a broken record and you feel like, oh my goodness, I've said this to you already. Why are we doing this again? Why do you still have a mullet? Just kidding. Just kidding. Um, but those are those times where you just kind of have to, or you, the days when you're really tired, you admit, you're like, hey, I'm feeling a little short on capacity today. So if I seem grumpy, I am sorry. And apologizing in the moment, kind of owning that. A lot of it is repetition. But yeah, I think in the moment, if something's happening that needs to be addressed, address it again in kind of a positive way, like, hey, is something going on? Is there something I can do to help make this day better or something? And then, yeah, next time you see them, hey, I'm so excited that you're here today. We're going to have so much fun making pickles. Sorry, this is a program idea that popped in my head yesterday. And so now I'm obsessed with a pickle making program, but something like that.
All right, that was our last question. So I want to thank you all for sticking around and just thank everybody for so generously offering their time and energy, our presenters and everyone who is here today and the discussions in the chat. So just thank you everyone for your engagement. And I hope that you take at least one thing that you can apply right away in your libraries, because our adult learning theory says the sooner we can apply something, the more likely we are to hold on to our learning. So really want you to go out there and do the thing, basically. So as a reminder, we will save the recording, and once we've got it loaded on librarieslearn.org, you will get a message with the link to the recording, and we'll also load any extra resources there as well. And then if you would be willing to complete our survey, that would be amazing, because we really appreciate the feedback and we go through every survey to learn and grow. And then there is a part 3 for this series. So I'm going to also put the link in the chat. If you haven't registered for part 3 and would like to, please do so. There is also an archive of the entire Talking Teen Services series. So you're welcome to take advantage of that as well. So thanks again. And I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your week and take care of yourselves and each other and enjoy your fall programming, whether it involves pickle making or not. So
If that's what you take and implement, I'm okay with that, by the way.
There you go. Thank you, everyone.